Now, before we leave, we're going to finish off with a very classic systema drill known as segmentation. And normally this involves striking from different segments of the body. So here we begin first, so-called striking from the hand, wherein we focus really on the surface from which we're striking. Sometimes this can be done even with exaggerated deformation. And this is widely used in styles like Ross and the Rutinsky method, because if your surfacing is good and you're braced, even a deformed structure will have power and resistance. And then with the so-called hinge punch, the tichuk, striking from the elbow, whether outwardly or inwardly, again, this is not to say that this is how we have to strike all the time. It is a cultivation drill to teach us through mechanical limitations to liberate antagonistic resistance, to become more efficient. Typically this is done standing perpendicular to an object. You'll see a lot of systema striking demos done this way. The misunderstanding from these types of drills is that people then think this is all that we use when we strike. It can be if context is limiting us, but this is mostly a cultivation drill. When striking from the shoulder, the next joint up, it's often done at first with a large, exaggerated windmill-style motion. And this, even the swing of your arm sometimes has to be slowed down because it has so much additional power. And then it can be done with a far more realistic, if you want to say, or a subtle whirl of the shoulder, a lifting and a dropping. Strikes like overhands in MMA, like you see here, are a classic example of striking primarily from the shoulder. And then what's often looked is that that's not where it stops. Then we can look at moving from the scapula and the thorax, exaggerating that movement. Sometimes it's done with a lateral wave. Sometimes it's done by sucking the chest in and then squeezing the shoulder blades together. Striking from the thorax, again, is just a way of awakening mobility in the trunk. When we do something like a classic jab, sometimes the action of squeezing the shoulders together can add that thoracic activation. It gives you just a little extra bit of elongation and also a lot of extra power. Here I'm working more on a shoulder whirl where the shoulder comes up to the ear and then drops. It's a little bit more subtle than a classical systema demo because I'm doing it in a conventional boxing stance. Then we apply the same principle to the stomach. So this is really like a spinal wave where I'm kind of generating it from the breath, from the stomach, exaggerating the shoulders and letting it drop. Again, it's not going to look like this in a fight, guys. This is just to build awareness, to liberate mobility in the body, to increase and enhance appreciation of what every body segment does. In a lot of my early demos, I would only show shoulder, elbow, and hand, and people thought that was it. But we can activate many different parts of the body. Here I'm working largely from the waist, and you'll notice there's no pivot in the leg. So as we know, the knee is fundamentally a hinge joint. It does allow some small degree of rotation, and this is what we're recruiting here. And it certainly benefits us to maintain and strengthen that subtle inherent rotation. But this is really about feeling the waist move, and particularly from the breath. Sometimes as you're breathing, your waist can feel like a wet washcloth being wrung out. This type of arm flailing work is typical in a lot of the Okinawan-style white crane exercises. This is a very classic Makiwara drill. I'm doing it a little bit looser and more guerrilla-like than I traditionally learned it in the Japanese martial arts. But again, it's primarily being generated from the waist. We move now to the hips. So again, although it is pulling up my heel a little bit, I'm really focusing on my pocket driving forward. And it's pocket to punch. It's hip first, hand last. You notice I'm really exaggerating that churn from the hip.
Reverse hip.
And then we're looking on a hip retraction where the hip goes forward and pulls back in the time that the punch is delivered. Oftentimes used in very snapping punches. It is very particular in wave work as a hyper cultivation of your sensitivity, and it's said to help you bounce from one target to another. It's a more advanced one, but I included here just sequentially. Finally getting to like a more classical boxing pivot. And I can pivot with my lead, I can pivot while dropping to emphasize my appreciation. But now I'm really thinking about you know, dropping as I flex in the knee, and that really pulls the hip over. It really puts a lot of mass into your punch, and it emphasizes the push from the feet. And then when we think of striking from the feet, that can be done with a trigger step or a gravity step like I see here, or it can be done by just advancing with basic footwork. I like to work close in the Makiwara and then work on striking as I back up, which is a hallmark of Soviet boxing, knowing how to strike as you arrive, but also as you arrive while retreating. Fighters like Fedor Emelianenko were experts at baiting people and catching them on the retreat, because conventional wisdom has it that you can't strike effectively while backing up, and it's just not true.